Okay, everybody, here we go again. This time we have a lesson on the top 5 presentation traps. I'm going to call them traps just because it makes things a little bit more interesting. These are traps that we can run into that could potentially derail or even completely destroy our presentations, and traps that we need to know to look for so that we can avoid them. As always, these are required notes, so there will be a time that I am looking for them. Make sure that you have them on the day that they are due. So today we're going to be talking about presentation traps, and just to be a little bit creative, I've put the Joker up here. For a lot of us, presentations are a bit of our nemesis. You know, we face them, we hate them. We despise them, and yet they keep coming back to haunt us. So if we think of presentations as that nemesis character like the Joker, and think about, well, how do we vanquish them? Then sometimes that might help. So if our lesson objectives are to be able to identify the traps that doom our presentations, we'll be able to hopefully get rid of that nemesis. So we'll be looking to identify those traps, we'll be looking to avoid those traps, and then ultimately we'll be looking to defeat that nemesis, that presentation nemesis. Trap number one is that people who are presenting don't know enough about their topic. And this is a problem because if you don't know enough about your topic, when you start trying to talk about it, it becomes clear to the audience that you don't know what you're talking about. So, to avoid this problem, you have to know more about your topic than you're going to present. Essentially, you have to be able to answer any question that might come up, which is why the second part of avoiding this problem is anticipating questions that people might ask and make sure that you can answer them. It's not enough just to have your presentation planned out and, hope that it's going to go smoothly. You really have to know more than you plan on presenting, and you have to think about what people might ask you about your topic later on or during the presentation, because if they ask you something that you don't know, then it becomes clear that you don't know enough about your topic, and that's trap number one. Trap number two is that you read directly from your materials, which everybody is guilty of. Of course, we're going to read from our materials from time to time, right? But just like what I'm doing here is I read the material and then I'm expanding on that material, right? Nobody wants to watch anybody read directly from the material, whether that's a poster board or a PowerPoint or note cards or a piece of paper. The worst presentations are the ones where people are just reading from their materials. So how do we avoid this? Number one, we make sure that we speak to our audience. We make sure that we're using eye contact. We make sure that we're varying our tone. We are making sure that even if we don't feel the enthusiasm, we are faking enthusiasm for the information that we're presenting. Or we find a reason to find enthusiasm in what we're presenting. This could be a more boring presentation if I didn't come up with, little things that help me become enthusiastic about it, like turning these into traps, right? I could have just said, here are 5 things that people do wrong with our presentation. But if I turn it into traps, then I have a little bit more buy-in, right? So make sure that you're speaking to your audience and demonstrating your knowledge. And in that way, you're hopefully going to avoid just reading directly from your materials. Number 3 is that your presentation lacks structure. A lot of people will get up there and just pour information out to the audience, and if that information isn't supported by some kind of structure, the audience doesn't care. They tune it out, and it just turns into a boring presentation. So how do we avoid this? We make sure that we have structure. We make sure that we have a claim, that we provide evidence for our claim, that we elaborate upon how our evidence supports our claim, and that we conclude with a connection to our audience. It's not that the only connection should be in the conclusion, but definitely the conclusion needs to connect to our audience. And you should have seen this structure before. It comes up when we're writing paragraphs, it comes up when we're writing papers, it should come up when we're just talking to people. So a presentation should have that same basic structure that you start with a claim and you're supporting that claim with evidence and elaboration and concluding. Um, and in that way, you're taking the audience on a journey that you're saying, here is what I'm going to do for you through this presentation. And so giving your presentation structure helps us avoid that trap of just, telling a whole bunch of information. Four is that people's visual aids are hard on the eyes, and we're all guilty of this to some extent, but we want to be as unguilty of it as possible. So planning and making presentations or visual aids that are easy to look at is really important. So here's how we do that. We keep our work clean, straightforward, and consistent. We don't want to make it too complicated to look at. We don't want to change the way the slides look all the time, or the way the whatever we're looking at, whether it's slides or whether it's a video. We want them to have kind of the same pattern, and we want that pattern to be straightforward. We use colors that complement each other so that aren't difficult to see at close up or at a far away range. Something that's easy for us to see at all ranges. We use a font that's easy to read, nothing too fancy, but also nothing that's too simple. Something that's just, a little bit stimulating, but also easy to follow. And remember that fewer words are better, because if you just use the words as a cue, then you should be able to expand upon those cues. We don't want giant paragraphs on the board that people are forced to read. One thing that I can add to this is that if you plan out how you're going to reveal the information, so that we're only looking at the information we want to see at the moment that we want to see it. We're not looking too far ahead and we're not looking too far behind. That's another thing that we can do. And in that way, we can avoid having visual aids that are hard to look at or hard on the eyes. Trap number 5 is that we are unpracticed or unprepared, and this is one that's often overlooked by people. It's also one that people are afraid of for some reason. It's hard for people to practice. We just kind of want to get up and do it one time, but practicing is really, really important. So here's how we practice and prepare, sorry, and that is we dress appropriately. That means we've got to plan how we're going to dress. You can't just get up and throw clothes on the day of a presentation. Usually business casual to semi-formal is what we're going to want for presentations in school. So that means, making sure that we're wearing a nice shirt, especially if we're guys. A tie isn't necessary, but a nice shirt, nice pairs of pants, nothing that's, distracting, something that's straightforward and semi-formal. That we speak confidently and audibly, which means that we have to practice out loud. You can't practice in your head, it's just not the same. Making sure that we've practiced being loud enough for everybody to hear, but not so loud that we're being obnoxious, hopefully. And making sure that we're speaking slow enough for people to understand. We need to be aware of how we use our body, and that's another thing that practicing can help, so that we're not fidgeting around. We know what we're going to point at when we're going to point at it. We know how we're going to use our hands. We know how we're going to stand and where we're going to move and when we're going to do that, so that our body doesn't become a distraction. And then obviously we need to face the audience and make eye contact from time to time. You don't have to have constant eye contact, but looking out to your audience is really important. Again, something that practice will help. So we don't want to fall into that trap of being practiced or unpracticed or unprepared. Do this, then we end up with this villain of presentations, which so many of us struggle with, being shackled. It's not that it's going to be easy. Of course, it's not going to be easy. Fighting the Joker was never easy for Batman, right? But he usually wins. And if we really want to be great at presenting, there we go. If we really want to be great at presenting, then we avoid these traps by doing 5 things. And this is just kind of a recap, but also maybe a little bit of new information. Number 1, knowing far more about the topic than the audience does. All right? Make sure that you know way more than the audience, way more than you even plan on saying, just in case. Number 2, engaging your audience while staying on topic. We definitely want to make sure that any engagement strategies that we use tie back to whatever we're talking about. Number 3, having a clear vision for our presentations. We want to know what the point of our presentation is, what we're going to be proving to the audience, and how we're going to prove that to the audience. Number 4, we make sure to supplement with attractive visual aids, but nothing that's going to be distracting and nothing that's going to be difficult to look at. And finally, making sure we are great presenters by making sure that we practice to build up our confidence, so that we go in feeling that we can do this. We know that it'll be difficult, but we also know that we can accomplish it. And if you follow these guidelines, you should be able to do a really good presentation, if not a great presentation, and vanquish that villain. All right, I will see you soon.